It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland.
So everybody seemed to really dig what we did a week ago. If you go to our YouTube page, search Fantasy Football Hustle, not only can you view the full show, but we're going to have each individual guy broken down so you can just click right to James Conner or Mark Ingram or Devin Singletary, or whoever we talk about here. Another reason you guys really need to go subscribe to the YouTube page. Things are blowing up over there. Big thanks to our guy 5 Yard Lee from the 5 Yard Rush podcast for helping us out, do all that stuff. And of course, our main man, I'm going to mess up the last name again. Corey's last name, Dwain, hit me with it. Hypus. Okay. Corey Hypus. He is our, what's our title for him this week? Chief Hustle Data Strategist, Assistant to the Regional Manager. He's the guy that makes all these pretty slides with Dwain's data. So we super appreciate Corey there. Follow him on Twitter at Corey. That's COREY_HIETPAS. You'll see him tagged in a lot of our stuff at FF Hustle. Great guy doing the Lord's work here for us at the Fantasy Football Hustle. But let's jump in right now to the first running back we want to talk about, Dwain, and that is Leonard Fournette. He's got an ADP right now of RB14, coming off the board around pick 32. Now, Leonard Fournette's a guy who's been pretty productive. Last year, he averaged 22.7 touches per game. That was only second to CMC. He had 100 targets. 100 targets, folks. That's crazy. 76 receptions. Nobody saw that coming. There's going to have to be some positive touchdown regression. He was RB9 last year. Here's something that I don't like, though, Dwain, is they added a receiving back that Jay Gruden loved when he was in Washington, and that's Chris Thompson. Chris Thompson had 35 targets through the first 5 weeks. Only Eckler and CMC had more through the first 5 weeks. So to me, that's a big red flag that he ain't getting those 100 targets again. But let's dive in right now. Give me your thoughts on Mr. Fournette.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a couple of quick things before we hop in. So one way to think about this show as we walk through this, number one, these are in order of ADP, and then we'll do a final take on each guy. If you're listening on the podcast, I'm going to talk a little bit about the graphics that we're showing on YouTube. So make sure you hop over to YouTube, subscribe, and check it out. A lot of like Brian said, we're doing a lot of hard work on that. But one way to think about this is, are any of these guys potential arbitrage plays to some of the guys that we talked about for round 2 last weekend, right? So we talked about some of the warts of Josh Jacobs, of Nick Chubb, of some of those guys that we love, right? Great running backs, really high efficiency. Any one of them could be Derrick Henry in a given year because, they could hit, they could win a rushing title and score you a lot of touchdowns, but they're going to struggle a little bit in the passing game. So really now we're getting down to a tier of, there are some guys in this grouping they really have similar roles to Nick Chubb, similar role to Josh Jacobs, even to Joe Mixon, if you listen to the last show. And so you have to start to think about, what could my draft strategy be? If what does this allow me to do if I like some of these guys? And so we're just going to try to really load you up on the information so that, and we'll give you our thoughts, but you can also make your own call. So Drake, you set up Fournette well. I think the key with Fournette, like you said, we'll talk about Chris Thompson, in a minute. But looking at last year, he had the whole backfield to himself. The biggest issue for Fournette wasn't really around volume. You see he only had two weeks that were in the top 12 runners, which would have given him an RB1 finish. But then he had multiple weeks, right, where he was at least an RB2. He didn't have too many super stinkers. He was at least like an RB3 most weeks. His lowest of the season was this week 14, 9.3 points. He was just on a really, really bad offense. He averaged 17 points per game last year from a fantasy standpoint. The cool thing about him is, and love what Corey did, he saw what we did last week where I inserted some screenshots. So he created this cool visual people can see right away, the percentage of team drop back and the margin of victory. So that's how much the team won or lost by, and then where's the impact to the player. What you'll notice, with Fournette is he's more stable than actually some of the backs that we looked at. Now that's going to change this year with Chris Thompson, but it was because he still had that receiving down work that was helping keep him viable in some weeks where they're losing, by 7 points and having to drop back a lot, and he can still jump up here into this RB2 range. And that was because of his receiving ability. Okay. You'll notice down here in these games, the Jags are absolutely getting their wheels blown off. Right. Wow. And if you look at Fournette, Yeah, Fournette, was really more of a check down option. He's not a running back that's going to be running like angle routes, wheel routes, bullet routes, things working up into the second layer of the field against linebackers and safeties. That's what Chris Thompson's going to bring. And like you said, Thompson is a very viable receiving threat along the lines of an Austin Eckler and CMC, Alvin Kamara, those guys. So it's just a guy that's never been able to stay healthy, but definitely a mismatch kind of player. And so some of this that we saw with Fournette last year, we're going to see go away. Again, all of his snaps were great last year. Everything was above. What I expect to see this year is whenever you see these high percentages of having to drop back to pass, you see some of these really big losses, or this one was a win by 13, but some of these games where they're getting blown out like here, I think you're going to see Fournette drop down into this RB2, RB3 range, more like what we saw in some of the information we shared last week around Josh Jacobs. We shared the information last week, similar around Joe Mixon, some of those guys. So here are the rushing attempts, and this is really what saved Fournette last year. I mean, look at all these weeks where he's up above RB1, even one of them whenever they're losing by 22 points. Almost every week, right, from a rushing attempt standpoint, is at least an RB2. He only has 2 weeks where he's below that. I think he'll have a chance this year, Drake, to keep his rushes in this RB2 range most weeks. I think we're going to see less of these spikes up into the RB1 range, though, because of what we're going to see with Chris Thompson in some of these weeks where you definitely won't get this kind of thing very often, where you've got a blowout situation going on and you still see him getting this kind of workload. But you see his percentage of the attempts lined up down here across the bottom, 81, 71, 75, 76. I still think he'll get that same percentage of attempts. I don't think Chris Thompson is much of a threat in the running category, but where Chris Thompson is going to be a threat is to the snaps, which will then turn into a few more passes, right? If that makes sense. So if we look at, the last year the routes ran, and we noticed Corey did some good work on this. We had some, he and I got together this week and took some feedback from the audience. And so we changed these last 2 slides, that this one and the one before, from being percentages, and we put the percentages at the bottom for you guys, and we actually are using more raw totals. So you actually see the number of routes ran versus a running back one averages 22 routes ran per game. Fournette was above that every year. That's what's going to change, to your point, Drake. So really around final take, on Fournette, I think, the overall problems are you've got a team offense that could be really crappy. You got Chris Thompson coming in, who's going to steal passing work. And then you have what I just would call the Fournette factor. I mean, the guy can just be a bonehead, right? He's cost me so much money in DFS before. I don't know if you guys remember, but it was 2 years ago. He was absolutely blowing up for RB1 of the whole day. I had Fournette in a bunch of lineups. I just loved the matchup. Everybody was off of him. I think he was like 2% owned. And that was the game where he pulled his helmet off and swung it at another player. I
remember texting you during that.
Yeah, because you had seen how I was doing. I sent you a screenshot. Like I was winning. I don't know. It was like 10 grand or something at the time. And you're like, holy crap. You're like, Fournette just needs to just hold steady. And then he did that. And you sent me, I remember you texted me and be like, oh shit. Yeah, exactly. Now the thing that helps, right, is Jay Gruden, is going to bring more balance to the offense. A lot of people think that Jay Gruden's like, going to drop back past 70% of the time. Actually, he's usually about a 55-45 guy. The problem is when you're going to be trailing, the Jaguars defense went from being one of the best in the league to just being atrocious. And so they're not going to be able to stop other teams. So I see this team being a 57-58% pass team. That's going to get Thompson on the field more. But the positive for Fournette is he could offset all of that, Drake, if he just scored a few more touchdowns, right? So his touchdown regression is actually regressing back positively, right? Or you hear some people say aggression to the mean. But to take him at his ADP of a 32, right? So you're talking about a guy that you're taking in early round 3. I've seen him go late round 3. I've seen him slip into the 4th. I'm much more willing to take a guy like Fournette when he slips into the 4th, because really what you're betting on is his touchdown regression has to hit for you. Because those, I think 100 targets that he had last year, I don't know, you probably have it right in front of you, Drake. I've been looking at percentages all morning. But if you look at that, that's going to come way down. There's no way that, Fournette is going to be at those numbers. So if you look at where I've got, Fournette, for the season, right now, I've got him projected at, let's see here, Drake. I've got him at, in a half-point PPR, 202 points, which is what we're looking at here as far as ADP goes. And I've got him at 56 targets and 42 receptions. Okay, so that's a big dip, from where he was last year. Now his touchdowns, I gave him 7 on the season versus the 3 that he had last year. I am anticipating that that's going to regress back to the mean. The biggest issue he had was he just didn't have many attempts from inside the 5-yard line. This offense was just never, ever down in that territory. The other good thing for him, he's a strong yards after contact runner. So even if his offensive line isn't very good, he always has a chance to be around that 4 yards per carry just because he can work his way, through contact. But I'm totally with you. So where I hit on this is I'm willing to take Leonard Fournette more when he slides, but I don't get excited about it because I don't like betting on things like touchdowns coming back because they're so unpredictable. Just because you flipped the coin and it said heads one next year doesn't necessarily mean that you have a higher percentage, right, of hitting, tails on the next coin flip, right? Each time is literally an equal percentage that you're going to hit, a heads or a tails. And that's the same kind of thing that works here. We could end up, with a flipping the coin and we get a tails again. And if Fournette scores 4 or 5 touchdowns, you're really not going to like having him. You really don't want him as your RB1 in any case, like if you're trying to go contrarian. But as your RB2, I think we're going to talk about some backs that are a little cheaper that you would rather have.
And if you want Dwain's rankings, which so many of you always ask for, you can head over to Pro Football Focus, and they are available for you. Right now, Leonard Fournette is Dwain's RB18 in his initial rankings.